Hello and welcome to the Social World Podcast. I'm Dave Niven. You can find me on socialworldpodcast.com and on Twitter @Dave Niven. It's a weekly podcast that engages with the social world in all its variety. It's got news, reviews, guests and opinions, and you're welcome. Today's episode has a lovely interview, a really good interview with Jonathan Singer, who actually is the host of the Social Work podcast based in Philadelphia. And Jonathan's actually been podcasting now for 6 years and is so experienced, and he's given me some help in actually setting the Social World podcast up. And today I'm going to talk to Jonathan about a variety of things, but principally focusing on youth suicide, because Jonathan's background is in social work as well. After that, I think I'm just going to give some reflections about my memories of Sri Lanka, a troubled country, but a paradise, and a very kind of contradictory place. So I hope you're interested, and give us some feedback. We're getting some at last. We're actually beginning to get established, and I'm grateful to you for that. But I would like more feedback. I'd like to get involved with you, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about what you might like to hear in the future. So from now, also keep in touch, send in your comments, and possibly too we could do some interviews with some of you for the future. I'd like that. Thanks. Jonathan Singer, Assistant Professor of Social Work at Temple University, the founder and the host of the Social Work podcast since 2007, based in Philadelphia. You teach, you instruct, and one of the things, Jonathan, it's so good to have you on the program, but Jonathan, one of the things that you're specifically interested in that you told me about was youth suicide. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what interested you in the first place in that subject, but also what your current sort of thinking in about developments and how you're actually getting a hold of data and how you're actually pursuing it?
Yeah, absolutely. And David, thanks so much for having me on your podcast series. I got interested in youth suicide when I was first out of my graduate program in the mid-90s. I got a job as a social worker in a mobile crisis unit for children and adolescents. And what we did all day was talk to suicidal kids. And as my career has moved on, I have gotten interested in understanding more about some of the questions about how kids get services, what sort of services they get, what's most effective. And so that's one of the reasons why I've gone back, where I went back, got a PhD, and am now doing research. One of the things that I'm really interested in is how do you work with families where there's a suicidal kid?
Yeah.
What we know that high family conflict or low family support, particularly low parental support, is a significant risk factor for suicide. So how do you change that? Like if you're a social worker out there and you're working with a family and there's a suicidal kid, what do you do that's most effective at helping parents be the best parents they can be for this kid?
Yeah.
Certainly when a kid is suicidal, it throws into question everything, right? It's like, do I stand firm on bedtime, right? Do I let them stay home if they're feeling, not well? What do I tell their siblings about this suicide stuff? So all of those questions, I think, are really important practice questions that there are very few good answers to.
Okay. Different levels, aren't there, though? I mean, you the way you're talking there obviously means that you've got an input with the child you need, you've an input with the parents, and you've an input with the siblings, you've probably got an input with the community, you've probably also got inputs with school and education and all sorts of other places where that child interacts. It's a hugely complex situation, isn't it?
Hugely complex. That is exactly right. And because it's so complicated, and because everybody gets so anxious around the topic of suicide, And I think, for the most part, rightly so, right? Because we're talking about a life and death situation. But there's so much anxiety about it that everybody at every level, sort of micro, meso, macro, and in every system, whether it's a policy or a direct practice or an agency supervisor, everybody hunkers down and just gets myopic and focuses on their area. So the practitioners just get really focused on dealing with the parent and the child, and they don't think about the school environment specifically, or the hospital. They don't think much about, well, what community supports. Even though everybody knows this is important, they just have so much to focus on in their area that it's a really challenging area to establish good continuity of care and good, what's the word? Sort of a inter-system or inter-level thinking about it.
Okay, yeah, I got you. I mean, and also, I'm not sure, but I suspect you would have great sympathy with the social worker who's actually got to pull all these threads together in some kind of, generic approach. Because ultimately, making the best assessment needs the best data, and the best data can come from all these different angles before you actually analyze it and put some plan into action. So I imagine that underlines the complexity.
Absolutely. Well, and in the UK, you guys have done some amazing things about suicide prevention that we haven't done in the United States. Mm-hmm. So, for example, my understanding is that acetaminophen, Tylenol, you have to buy them in bubble packs these days in the UK. Like, you can get a bottle of 200 pills of acetaminophen. Is that correct?
It is correct. You do now get these regulated small amounts.
Yeah, and that's one small thing that is, it's not a small thing. I mean, it's a policy level change that you can be the best direct practice social worker and really working with the individual and the family. And if you know that the kid can go out and buy a bottle of 200 Tylenol, and then taking 12 of those could result in death, again, you're limited in a certain sense.
Yes, indeed. And
so,
my understanding was that the actual drugs, even prescription drugs, were one of the more favored forms of suicide. So it had even more resonance when you're giving sort of statistics like that, and there's legislation like that, I presume.
Absolutely. And one of the areas that is really hot in the media, of course, is cyberbullying.
Yeah, right.
And I have a lot of sympathy for journalists because they walk into their meeting in the morning, the editor says, a kid one town over died by suicide, and we got to have something ready for the 4 o'clock news.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and so then the reporter, who could have been covering a bank robbery the day before, and something else the day before that, has to go out and not only find experts, but also make a coherent narrative out of this thing that we have just talked about being so incredibly complicated that social workers, people for whom this is their job to understand, will have a really hard time piecing it together. And so one of the things that happens is that the media likes to work under the formula of something plus bullying equals suicide.
Right, I've got you. Yeah, I always remember here when I did a lot of media work, being phoned up by people on news desks, and virtually, I'm not kidding you, they would say, do you think you could get me somebody that's been sexually abused for the 6 o'clock news?
Yeah, of course. Right. Yeah, I mean, they're looking for a narrative.
I know.
Yeah.
But working with the media sometimes can be, we have taken some strides. I mean, look, you're embracing the media with a highly successful social work podcast. I mean, essentially now embracing the media seems to be one of the few ways to actually balance some of these scales that are around. For example, the bit about working with trainee journalists, get social workers in there on trainee journalist courses, and get journalists in on trainee social workers courses, just to get each other a bit of an idea about what their world is like.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea. Absolutely. And what you just mentioned about the podcast that I do, and of course what you're doing with your podcast, is that we are becoming the media in a
Yes.
very real way. The folks that listen to your podcast are getting news filtered through your social work lens.
I love it. I just think it's such an enlightening development in media. Let me ask you something else just before we finish this subject, though, Jonathan. I'm very interested in the suicide thing. Gender, and in America, I suppose we're talking state by state, so we're talking geography as well. Are there any kind of real interesting differentials? Because I'd heard that in the States, when you're talking about cyberbullying and suicides accordingly, twice as many girls are bullied than boys, but twice as many boys commit suicide. Would that be a figure that you might be familiar with?
I don't know that figure, and I probably should. But what I do know is that this debate about how does traditional or offline bullying differ from online bullying or cyberbullying, one of the distinguishing factors is that offline bullying tends to be more physical, right? We think about the schoolyard, kids getting beaten up, harassed, picked on, that sort of thing. Cyberbullying or online bullying tends to be more relational. Like, you can't reach through your cell phone and punch somebody, but you can taunt them. You can, call them names, do all sorts of things. And that tends to be something that girls do more than boys. And so one of the big differences between cyberbullying and offline bullying is that it tends to be more girls than engage in offline bullying. And so that
makes sense. That does make sense when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get kids online, it's more relational, and it's more girls as a result. And boys die by suicide more often anyway. Right. So girls make attempts, 3 to 4 times as often as boys, but boys die by suicide 2 to 3 times as often. And it's because they use more fatal means. They tend to use guns. They tend to jump. They tend to hang themselves, that sort of thing.
And that's reflected in adults too, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. What about the geography? Because over here we can pick up statistics, for example, taking Europe as a base, whatever, although it's huge. I mean, just the same as the States are huge. But are there huge differences between regions of the States?
Yes, the western mountainous areas for suicide in general, there's more suicides there. But those are also the areas that are more rural. And what we know for youth suicide is that youth in rural areas die by suicide twice as often as youth in urban areas.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. And of course, there are all sorts of questions. I mean, in the United States, we have guns, right? We have lots of guns.
Yeah.
We have a gazillion guns. And guns are more common in rural areas. They are more, some would say, part of the culture in rural areas. And I did a study that looked at how social workers talk to parents following a suicide assessment. And these were social workers in rural areas. And they brought up the issue of guns. And one of the things that they said about working with folks in rural areas is they said, guns are so ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're like furniture. Mm-hmm. People forget that they have guns around. And so part of our education is not saying, oh, by the way, guns are dangerous. Guns can kill, like they know that, or people can kill with guns, depending on what your politics is. But they have to be reminded, do you have guns laying around? Because they don't see them. Because there are so many, and they're so ubiquitous. And so, there's all of these factors, like why would rural youth die more often? Is it because they have fewer mental health services? Is it because they're more isolated? Is it because when there's conflict with their parents or their peers, they have less alternative forms of support and interaction? Is it because there's, these days, less high-speed internet connection? And so youth who tend to be connected to people virtually, they can't? Or how much of it has to do with the presence of guns, which are the most lethal means that people can use to die by suicide? It's a very complicated question, and to my knowledge, there's been no sort of gold standard empirical study to answer.
No, I mean, fascinating, everything. Just one thing too is that the way forward, right? Although there's no, as you said, there's no magic answer here, but in terms of what you've found so far to be useful, let's put it that way, as opposed to any kind of real cure, but useful, would you say getting involved in education, or getting involved in community groups, or getting involved where young people congregate, or getting involved on the media, either or all of them as a kind of composite approach to trying to both raise awareness of the issues, all of the issues you've raised, but also of the fact that help is available and what that actually looks like?
Well, I certainly think that all of those factors are important, right? I think that having a community awareness and understanding of suicide risk, of protect factors, of suicide not being or suicidal thoughts and behaviors not being as a result of a moral failing, right? The classic thing that we deal with in social work, like, why are people poor? Oh, it's because they're bad people. No. Why are people suicidal? Because they're weak. No, right? It's not that. So I think having a community understanding of what contributes to suicide risk is an important buffer and an important way of reducing stigma. I was so lucky to be involved in Philadelphia in the creation of what we think of as the very first suicide prevention mural in the world. It was a 15-month project, involved over 1,000 people in the Philadelphia community, and it was called Finding the Light Within, and it was a mural that was designed by an artist, James Burns, from Philadelphia's Mural Arts program, but it was painted by people in the community, right? Sort of paint by numbers, but when it was finished, it was put up a massive mural on the side of a building, and it was truly an effort of the community where they could come together around suicide prevention and do something that wasn't sort of behavioral health, and yet it addressed the issue of suicide. One of the groups that came was a group of firefighters. Right, this is a group that typically does not get involved in mental health services, in behavioral health interventions, and yet they were so eager to participate because one of their own had died by suicide the previous year.
Oh, it's fascinating. Jonathan, I'm afraid we have to pull it together here and finish, but I'd really appreciate coming back and talking to you some more in the future about if half of the things that you've started threads running there we could talk about. It would be absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you giving this interview today, and wish you all the best in the future at the Social Work Podcast.
Well, David, thank you so much for having me and for taking the time, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing on your podcast, and having it be every other week is amazing. So it's an honor and a privilege to be a guest on your show. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was listening to the news about the Commonwealth Summit in Colombo in Sri Lanka and remembering my time over there. I went across there about 15 years ago, and some of the memories are so vivid today, and hearing stories about the place just brings everything back. It's such a contradictory country. The people are lovely. In general, the population are the most gentle, welcoming, kindest people that I've come across and travels abroad. I went across there for a conference, for a social work conference, and it was the first conference that had been held there for about 11 years of any substance because of the war, because of the troubles, and because of the conflict between the government and the Tamil Tigers from the north. And even the hotel that I was staying in had machine gun posts outside. It had bunkers there. The police were obvious everywhere. The army was in great numbers. But yet life seemed to just carry on as normal. And of course, what I was across there about was to do with sex tourism, was the men from Western industrialized countries going across there to abuse children. And like many places on the Pacific Rim, Sri Lanka was vulnerable and a target for thousands of men from the West going across there. Now, the police, I'd done some work with Interpol and their offences against minors group, and that was the way that I got an introduction to the police in Sri Lanka. And so when I was across there, I went and discussed things with them, and they were asking what should be done or what they thought should be done, and I was giving them my opinion. My view really then was the same as it is now. I think most people are aware of what policy changes Thailand made for serious drugs trafficking, in that they made it almost mandatory that huge sentences, heavy sentences, and even in some cases the death penalty was handed out to try and discourage people from flooding Thailand with Class A drugs. And I felt somehow the same in some respects, not necessarily for the death penalty, but certainly for a very serious, lengthy prison sentence should be handed out and should be made public, should be worldwide, should be publicised as far and wide as it could, and certain cases been made examples of. Now, as it happens, that didn't quite happen, but there are certain changes that did happen, and I'm pleased to say that I believe now it's one of the lesser destinations for paedophiles, lesser destinations for men that want to actually abuse children, although I'm pretty certain that it goes on in quite significant numbers still. But as you come into Colombo and the airport now, and I believe the money was funded by, I think, Save the Children, there's an enormous billboard that says, "Welcome to Sri Lanka. If you abuse our children, we guarantee you 20 years at least in horror class accommodation." So, in terms of actually stating intent, it was a start. The complexity, though, begins a bit when you look deeper into the situation. When I walked along the beachfront in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, within about 5 minutes, I was offered everything under the sun, apart from money exchanges, duplicate designer gear, watches, cameras, you name it. But also within the first 5 or 10 minutes, I was offered children, young children, both sexes, under 5, for the price of a pint of beer. It was just an absolutely stunning event for me. I mean, obviously I knew it went on, but so openly, so blatantly, and it just shocked me. Talking with NGOs in Sri Lanka, I came across the situation in its depth, because often there's no welfare system there. So there's no way that anybody who hasn't got any work or hasn't got any source of income can actually feed the family. And often the example given was, say there was a family of 7 or 8 children. Neither parent was working. None of the children were able to bring in much income. And so the only income they relied on was from some of the very young children in the family getting money from the sex trade and from Western men. Now, there's no way on earth that anybody would condone that. That should be interrupted. It should be interrupted totally, and the children should be prevented from having to experience that kind of activity. But remember, when that money dried up, when that income stopped, the children essentially starved, because no other way of getting income was available short of charity and foreign NGOs. So there's a complexity to it. But the gentility of the people and the quiet kind of acceptance of their lot was just amazing to behold. Another event occurred later on that I heard of. A friend of mine put a lot of effort into raising money to work with victims of the tsunami, which has happened, as you know, many years later. But much of Sri Lankan infrastructure in certain parts was wiped out, and many schools and houses were completely ruined. And one such place in the north, he found that an orphanage had actually been flattened. The money was raised, the orphanage was rebuilt, people were hired, and he went across to visit it. And when he got there, what he found was that the adults involved with looking after the children had been captured one day by, they believe, the Tamil Tigers, lined up against the walls of the orphanage and shot. The children witnessed it. This is the stark reality, the absolute polarity of activity in a country like Sri Lanka. The violence, the crazy kind of war that's gone on for such a long time. Yet, juxtaposed with that, it's like paradise. The Paradise Islands and the people in general are so beautiful. It's a real problem and it's a real puzzle. And so when I heard about the Commonwealth leaders' visit recently and the fact that the new government in Sri Lanka is totally denying that any human rights violations occurred, totally opposite to the fact that hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of people were actually there willing to give evidence about their disappeared relatives. In fact, pro rata to the population, it's said that by Amnesty that effectively the number of people who have been so-called disappeared in Sri Lanka was only rivaled by Argentina in its heyday. And that's saying something. So again, we have this enormously polarized, sanitized view of a country that almost kind of seeps violence to its own. At the same time, it's still a beautiful tourist destination. It still provided me with some of the most peaceful and spiritual experiences that I've ever had in my life. I remember going to Kandy, a city in the centre of Sri Lanka, and the temple of Buddha's tooth. And as I walked in there, honestly, I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but I was engulfed in wave after wave of peace, tranquility, and a certain amount of sort of settling in my life. And it's a really weird but wonderful memory that I've got. So try and take all these memories, the violence, the children, the exploitation by the West, the disappeared, juxtaposed with the beauty, the peacefulness, the serenity, the lovely country, and in the main, the fantastic people. And you've got yourself a soup that is going to be so difficult to tease out all the different ingredients, and it's going to take a long, long time before that country settles. It's just some memories that I've had. And in social work and in combating child exploitation, I know that it's still a target area. I know that it's still a place that people go to abuse children. But at the same time, it's a beautiful island and a beautiful place. Well, we're now bringing this episode to a close. Thanks very much indeed for listening. Please visit www.socialworldpodcast.com or tweet us at Dave Niven. And if you like, please sign up for the regular newsletter. Thank you very much indeed for listening. See you next time.